The garden was quiet that morning. Wide shot a palace rising from pale stone 17 light years from the nearest human world, its towers catching the amber light of an alien sun, its grounds immaculate, undisturbed. Cut closer, a garden terrace, raised beds built by hand rows of blue and white blossoms just beginning to open. A man on his knees in the soil, sleeves rolled, hands buried in the earth, humming something no one in this empire has ever heard before. Closer still, his face, calm, open, the expression of a man with nothing to hide. His hands, still. The way hands are still when stillness is not peace, when stillness is practice, when stillness is the oldest discipline a person can learn and the hardest one to keep. Somewhere above the atmosphere, 5 warships crossed the boundary, and the man in the garden did not look up. He already knew. Part 1. The husband I thought I knew. The first thing I noticed about my husband was his hands. Not his face, not the nervous smile that showed too many teeth by our standards. Not the single travel case he carried, which seemed absurdly small for a man who had just crossed 17 light years to marry a stranger. His hands. They were still when everything else about him was uncertain. Still at his sides while the palace attendants swarmed around him with measurement tools and formal robes and anxious murmuring. Still while my father's chamberlain delivered the list of protocols he was expected to memorize before the formal reception. Still in a way that I had never seen in a person who was genuinely nervous. And Dave and Ress was supposed to be nervous. He was human, a species so new to the galactic stage that most of my father's advisors still referred to them as the newcomers, not as a dismissal exactly, but as a category, a holding pen for things that had not yet proven themselves worth a proper name. He came from a single star system, one world of origin, a handful of colonies, ships that my military commanders described as functional but unimpressive, no significant combat history, no seat on any interstellar council, no cultural legacy that extended beyond their own small corner of map space. And here he was, standing in the entrance hall of the Dalkane Imperial Palace on Athara, surrounded by carved stone that had been shaped before his species had discovered writing. Looking up at the vaulted ceiling with an expression I could not immediately read. Not awe, not intimidation, something quieter, something almost like recognition. I was watching from the upper gallery, which was not entirely proper for a princess receiving her betrothed. But I had found across 29 years of being heir to an empire that the most useful information about a person arrived before they knew they were being observed. So I watched. He thanked the attendants by name before they introduced themselves. Not their formal titles, their actual names which he had apparently learned from the staff manifest sent to him 6 weeks prior. The youngest attendant, a girl of about 14 who usually trembled through every formal reception, looked up at him with an expression of pure surprise. And he smiled at her the way you smile at someone you have been looking forward to meeting, like she mattered. I noted that, filed it away in the particular place I kept things that did not yet have an explanation, but felt like they eventually would. The marriage had been arranged through 14 months of careful diplomatic correspondence between my father's council and the Seoul Confederation's Office of External Affairs. It was by any reasonable political measure a minor gesture, a symbolic thread connecting an ancient empire to a young species that was beginning to appear with more frequency in the border sectors. My father considered it beneath our house. He said so, directly, in the council chamber with 12 of his senior advisors seated at the long table and me standing at the foot of it, which was where I stood when he wanted me to learn something rather than simply be told it. The union costs us nothing, he said, and generates goodwill in regions where their traders are becoming impossible to ignore. You will accept. I accepted. Not because I was ordered to. I had over the years declined a number of arrangements my father proposed, and he had grudgingly, and after considerable argument, accepted my refusals. I had that right. The law of succession in the Dalkane sovereignty was not built on the assumption that the heir was a decoration. I accepted because the arrangement made sense, because I was 39 years old and had spent those years watching how empires survived. And empires survived by understanding what was coming before it arrived. The humans were coming, small now, growing, and so I accepted. I did not expect to find them interesting. I certainly did not expect to find him interesting. He arrived with a data tablet loaded with Dalkane language tutorials. Level 1, the kind designed for complete beginners with pronunciation guides and cultural footnotes, and little animated diagrams showing the tonal inflections that gave our language its layered meanings. He was terrible at it. For the first 3 months, he mispronounced my name every single time. Saravan. 4 syllables the second, carrying a rising tone that indicated both respect and formality. He kept flattening it, making it sound like a word that meant, depending on context, either a type of root vegetable or a mild oath. And every time he mispronounced it, he apologized. Not with the excessive performance of humility apologies I had grown accustomed to from visiting dignitaries who believed my favor could be purchased with sufficiently elaborate self-abasement. Just, I'm sorry, I'll try again. And then he tried again. He was in the palace kitchens within his first week. This scandalized the kitchen staff to a degree that took me several days to fully appreciate. Because in 9,000 years of imperial history, no royal consort had entered that kitchen voluntarily. The kitchen was for servants. A consort eating from the kitchen was already irregular. A consort cooking in the kitchen was something the palace protocols had no category for. He made something called chili, which involved a long and apparently intense negotiation with the head cook about the availability of certain earth spices and the substitutability of others. The head cook later described the negotiation to me in tones of profound bewilderment as the most thorough conversation about food she had experienced in 30 years of service. He brought bowls of it to the guards on the eastern wing at midnight, because they had the overnight rotation and no one, he said, should have to stand watch for 6 hours without something warm. I heard about this the following morning from Captain Vorath, who commanded my personal detail and was not a man given to casual conversation. He reported it the way he reported everything, factually and without editorial. And then he paused, which was unusual. He said, the guards wanted me to tell you that your husband knows their names. All of them, Captain, all of them, Highness, including the 3 who transferred from the northern garrison last month. I said nothing. Vorath left, and I sat in my study with my morning briefing stacked in front of me and thought about a man who memorized the names of every guard in a palace he had lived in for 31 days. Not because it was strategic, not because he was building alliances or cultivating loyalty or doing any of the dozen things a politically ambitious consort might do with the same information. Just because apparently he thought they deserved to be known. The months became a year. The year became 2. He learned the language. Badly then, adequately then, with a fluency that surprised everyone, including me. His tonal inflections were still not perfect, but they were close enough that he could hold a real conversation now. And more than that, he could hold a Dalkane conversation, which meant navigating the particular architecture of implication and indirect meaning that made our language both beautiful and maddening to outsiders. He asked questions about everything: the history of the empire, the engineering of the palace, the ecology of Ithara's eastern continent. He asked Counselor Yanara about the legal principles underlying the sovereignty's treaty structure and spent an entire afternoon in her office, which left Inara in a state of pleasant bewilderment that lasted for days. He asked the palace archivist about the construction of the vaulted ceiling in the entrance hall, which I had walked under 10,000 times without thinking to wonder how it stayed up. It stayed up, the archivist told him with visible delight, because of a system of interlocking tension. Arches developed 800 years ago by a Dalkane engineer who had never received formal architectural training. Davin said that was the most interesting thing he had heard all month, and he meant it. That was the part I kept coming back to. He meant everything. The questions, the interest, the attention he paid to the people around him. There was no calculation in it that I could detect, and I was good at detecting calculation. I had grown up inside a court where calculation was the primary language, where every gesture carried a subtext and every smile was a move in a longer game. Davin did not play that game, or if he did, he played it so well that I could not see the board. I decided for the first year at least that he was simply uncomplicated, that some people were genuinely what they appeared to be, that the universe occasionally produced a person whose warmth was structural rather than strategic. I was wrong, but I did not know it yet. He asked about the flowers. This is the detail that stays with me more than any other. This small, ordinary thing. He had been on the garden terrace one morning, kneeling in the soil beside the raised beds he had built by hand over the previous 3 months. The palace gardeners had offered repeatedly to do the work. He insisted on doing it himself. He said he liked the way soil felt, the realness of it. I was on the balcony above, watching him the way I had developed a habit of watching him. Not because I was suspicious, but because there was something restful about it. A man wholly occupied by something small and alive and requiring patience. He looked up and caught me, and he held up 2 flowers, one in each hand. Blue and white, both Valesi blossoms, their petals still carrying the silver dew of the Atharan morning. Blue or white for the banquet table tonight. Both, I said. He nodded, with the gravity of someone receiving critical intelligence, and went back to his work with renewed focus, as though I had given him the most important information of his day. I turned away from the balcony and did not think about it again for hours. But later at the banquet, I noticed the flowers on the table, blue and white arranged in the specific alternating pattern that best caught the chandelier light. And I noticed that he was watching to see if I noticed. Not performing, checking. The way you check when something matters to you and you are not quite certain how to say so. The evening Admiral Orath insulted him was the first time I saw the other thing. The banquet was a routine diplomatic reception. Representatives from 3 allied systems, trade agreements due for renewal, the kind of evening I had navigated since childhood. All careful laughter and veiled positioning, familiar as breathing. Devon stood beside me in formal Dalkane robes. He had stopped looking uncomfortable in them around month 4. Now he wore them with a kind of easy adaptation that the court had decided to find charming. He made his rounds, asked the Solari ambassador's daughter about her linguistic research, inquired after the Vorath trade minister's grandchildren by name, referencing a conversation they had apparently shared 8 months prior. He was good at this, better than he should have been, which I noticed but did not pursue. Admiral Orath arrived near the end of the 3rd course. Old guard, 40 years of fleet command. He had never approved of the marriage, which he made clear through the particular brand of barely disguised contempt that senior military men of a certain generation deploy when they wish to signal disapproval without technically violating protocol. He had consumed too much wine. His voice carried deliberately when he spoke, the kind of deliberate that is designed to be overheard. And the pet, he said, his gaze sliding from me to Davin with open contempt. Tell me, human, do they let you out of your quarters without a leash? Or does the princess carry one in her ceremonial sash? The tables around us went silent. That particular silence, the stillness that falls over a room when someone has said something that cannot be unsaid, and everyone is deciding whether to pretend they did not hear it. I felt the familiar heat of protective anger rise in my chest. I began to form a response, the kind that would be precise and cold and leave no ambiguity about the consequences of repeating such a performance. But Davin answered first. His voice was light, perfectly timed. No leash, Admiral. I did ask for one when I first arrived. The palace supply office said they were out of stock. Apparently, the last shipment was requisitioned to outfit the senior admiralty. Laughter. The real kind. The kind that releases pressure and shifts the weight of a room. Orath's face darkened. He muttered something about human humor being a poor substitute for human accomplishment, and moved away. And I turned to look at my husband. His smile was already back, warm, easy, open. His posture was relaxed, one hand resting on the table beside his water glass. Everything about him projected the same gentle harmlessness he always carried. But for a fraction of a second before the smile returned, I saw something else. His eyes had gone flat. Not wounded, not embarrassed, not angry, just empty. The way a room looks when you open a door and find, instead of what you expected, a wall. Something vast and controlled that existed behind those gray eyes like deep water beneath ice. The kind with no visible bottom. And then it closed. And he was himself again. Reaching for his glass, saying something to the diplomat on his left, laughing at something in return. The moment passed so quickly that I told myself I had imagined it. I almost convinced myself. Almost. That night I could not sleep. The image kept surfacing, that half second, the flatness, the controlled absence of expression that was, I realized, in the dark hours of the middle watch, not the absence of feeling at all. It was the management of it. The practiced, deliberate management of something that was being kept very carefully in place. I had spent my adult life reading people. It was not a skill I had been taught formally, though the training had helped. It was something deeper. Something developed through years of watching a court full of people who needed things from me and were willing to perform whatever was necessary to get them. I knew the difference between a person who felt nothing and a person who was choosing not to show what they felt. And Davin Rest, for 1/2 of 1 second, had shown me he was the second kind. Past the middle watch, I woke and found the bed empty. I rose, walked through our chambers, quiet, the palace settling around me, found him on the balcony, standing perfectly still, his hands at his sides not resting on the railing the way a person stands when admiring a view. Hanging loose, distributed across his feet in a way that spoke of readiness rather than rest. His breathing was slow, controlled, drawn from somewhere deep. Davin. He did not turn immediately. There was a pause. 1 heartbeat. 2. Long enough for something cold to settle in my stomach. Then he looked over his shoulder and smiled. Couldn't sleep, he said. The stars are different here. I keep trying to find Saul, but the angle is wrong from this hemisphere. I accepted the explanation. I went back to bed. He followed a few minutes later and settled beside me, and his breathing evened out, and I lay in the darkness, and told myself everything was fine, that my husband was a kind man who planted flowers and deflected insults with clever humor and sometimes stood on balconies at night because he missed the star he had been born under. In the morning, I almost believed it. The transmission came while I was in my study. Inara entered without knocking. I looked up. In 6 years of service, Inara had never once entered my study without knocking. She was the most protocol-conscious person on my staff. Knocking was not a formality to her. It was a principle. The fact that she did not knock told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. "A vessel has crossed the outer sovereignty boundary," she said. Her voice was controlled in the way that professionals adopt when the information they carry is worse than they want it to be. "It is refusing all communication hails. It has not responded to automated identity challenges. It is maintaining a direct course for Ethera at a speed that suggests military-grade propulsion. Arrival in approximately 4 hours. One vessel." We dispatched 2 patrol frigates. The vessel deployed electronic countermeasures that disrupted our targeting arrays at engagement range. The patrol wing has been forced to fall back and is currently shadowing without the ability to establish weapons lock. I set down my documents. Our targeting arrays were the most advanced in the sovereignty. They had been designed to withstand electronic warfare from every sophisticated species in known space, tested against every countermeasure in our threat database, hardened through 9 generations of improvement. A single vessel, regardless of origin, should not have been able to disrupt them. "What is the origin signature?" Inara hesitated. The second thing she had never done before. "Terran," she said, "specifically flagged as a black registry vessel. No civilian transponder. No military identification number. It does not exist in any database the Sol Confederation has shared with us." I stood and walked to the window. Below in the garden terrace, Devon was kneeling in the soil, both hands in the earth around a row of white Valesi blossoms. From this height, he looked small and peaceful and completely unaware. "Has my husband been informed?" "No, Highness." "Inform him. Ask him to come to the command center immediately." He arrived 15 minutes later, garden soil still on his sleeves, a smudge of dirt across his right cheek. He looked around at the tactical displays and the tense faces of my military staff, and I watched his expression with more care than I had ever watched anything in my life. He gave no visible reaction to the data on the screens. He stood beside me, folded his hands in front of him, waited. The patient attentiveness of a man who knew how to wait. "A Terran vessel has entered our sovereign space," I told him. "Black registry, no identification, heading directly for this planet. It has already demonstrated the ability to neutralize our patrol frigates' targeting systems." I expected confusion. I expected the wide-eyed concern of a civilian confronted with a military situation he had no framework for. Instead, Davin looked at the tactical display, at the incoming ship's trajectory, at the speed profile, at the classification data scrolling along the right edge of the screen. And he asked a question. "What classification is the vessel?" The room went quiet. Officers exchanged glances. Admiral Orath, who had sobered considerably since the previous evening and was still carrying the stiffness of a man who had said something he could not take back, answered with visible reluctance. "Modified corvette class, Terran construction. No registered civilian configuration matches the hull profile." Davon's jaw tightened. A small movement, a slight flex of the muscle along the edge of his jaw, lasting perhaps 1 second. No one else in the room would have noticed it, but I was watching for exactly that kind of slip, and I caught it. And what it told me turned the cold feeling in my stomach into something much worse. He was not confused by this information. He was not frightened by it. He was recognizing it. The way you recognize a sound you have heard before, a pattern you have mapped before, a threat you have studied from the other side. He turned to me. And when he spoke, his voice was calm and level and stripped of every trace of warmth I had grown accustomed to over 2 years. The man who arranged flowers and joked with admirals and asked about table decorations was simply gone, replaced by someone whose voice carried the flat precision of a person delivering a tactical briefing. Sir Raven, I need to speak with you privately, right now. We stood in the anteroom off the command center, door sealed. And the person standing in front of me wore Devon's face, but carried himself like a different human being entirely. His shoulders were set differently. His weight was distributed across his feet differently. His breathing had changed, slower, deeper, from somewhere in the core of him rather than the surface. Even the way he looked at me was different. The ship is here for me, he said. I almost laughed. The idea was absurd. A black registry warship crossing sovereign alien space, defeating patrol frigates' targeting systems, heading directly for the throne world of an interstellar empire. All for a man who spent his mornings gardening and his evenings asking what I would like for dinner. Devon. That is ridiculous. You are a cultural attaché. Why would anyone send a warship for you? Because I was not always a cultural attaché. Saravan. The words settled into the room like stones dropping into still water. He said them simply, without drama, without the performance of revelation. Each one carried weight I had never heard in his voice before. Weight that had been there all along, I realized. Hidden beneath the easy smiles and the humble mannerisms and the careful, practiced performance of harmlessness. I waited. Before the Sol Confederation reassigned me to this post, he said I was something else entirely. The people on that vessel belonged to an organization called the Harrow Syndicate, a Terran Black operations network that went rogue during the Sol expansion wars. They started as a Confederation intelligence asset and evolved into an independent criminal enterprise with military capability. My unit was tasked with dismantling their operations. Over 3 years, we destroyed 3 of their primary cells. We cost them billions in assets, hundreds of trained operatives, their entire senior leadership chain. I searched his face for exaggeration, for fabrication, found none. He was telling the truth the same way he explained how to prune a flower stem. Matter of fact, without embellishment. They rebuilt, he continued. They always rebuild, and they have been hunting every member of my unit since the day we shut them down. Every person on my team is either dead or relocated under deep cover. Deep cover, I repeated. You mean hiding? He met my eyes without flinching. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in his expression that looked like an apology. Not for the danger, for the deception. The Confederation did not send me here as a diplomatic gift, Sir Raven. They sent me here to disappear. Your empire was considered remote enough and militarily powerful enough that the Syndicate would not risk entering your sovereign space to reach me. He paused. You were my cover. This marriage, this palace, the gardens, the banquets, all of it was designed to bury me deep enough that they would never find me. Another pause. It appears they found me anyway. The room felt smaller. 2 years. The names of every guard at the gate, the meals cooked for servants who had never been cooked for, the flowers blue and white arranged to catch the chandelier light. The question about which colors I preferred, and the way he checked quietly to see if I had noticed. A blade concealed in a bouquet, and I had held the bouquet in my hands for 2 years and thought it was just flowers. Before I could find words, Inara's voice came through the comm with controlled urgency. Highness, long-range sensors have detected 4 additional vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. 2 frigates, 1 heavy cruiser, 1 light carrier, all displaying Terran hull configurations, converging with the corvette on an intercept course for Ithara. 5 ships, not a scouting party, not a probe. An invasion force designed to overwhelm resistance and extract a single target from the most heavily defended planet in the sovereignty. Davin closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, the last trace of the man I had married was gone, and in his place stood someone whose eyes held the focused stillness of something waiting to be used. I need access to the palace armory, he said, and because I had spent 2 years watching him, because I had accumulated every small true thing, the names, the flowers, the bowl of chili at midnight for people he had no reason to care about, because I had seen the flatness behind his eyes, and I had seen what lay beneath the flatness. I brought him to the armory myself. The armory occupied an entire floor beneath the palace's central keep. Plasma rifles, energy lances, shock batons, heavy assault cannons, the most advanced weapons in the sovereignty laid out in gleaming rows. Davin walked past all of them without a single glance. He moved to the far end of the chamber, a climate-controlled storage area for confiscated contraband, items seized from smugglers and black market traders over the years, catalogs shelved forgotten. He scanned the shelves with an efficiency that told me he had already mapped this room, already found what he would need. During some previous visit, I had not noticed in the way I had not noticed so many things. He opened a battered metal case and found a human-made sidearm, blocky, angular, none of the elegant lines of Dalkane weaponry. Where our weapons looked like art, this looked like a tool designed by people who cared only about function. He picked it up, and his hands transformed. That is the only word I have. The careful, gentle hands that coaxed flower stems into soil became something mechanical and exact. He disassembled the weapon in 3 seconds, inspected each component, reassembled it, tested the slide mechanism, examined the barrel, loaded a magazine of Terran ammunition from an adjacent case. Every movement fluid, practiced, impossibly fast. He had not touched a weapon in 2 years. His muscles had not forgotten a single step. He found a second sidearm and repeated the process with identical speed. Then a compact knife with a blackened blade secured against his inner forearm beneath his sleeve. Using a strip of cloth, he tore from a storage cover without pausing to think about it. Then 3 small cylindrical devices, no larger than my thumb, distributed into specific pockets with the practiced efficiency of a man following a routine performed 10,000 times. He knew exactly where each item belonged on his body, which pocket, which angle, which hand would reach for which device. I watched his face throughout. No excitement, no dread, no reluctance. The expression of someone performing a task as natural as breathing, as automatic as a heartbeat. The transformation was not dramatic. No single moment, no declaration. It was gradual and total, like watching water freeze. He turned to me, and I saw it fully for the first time. Not the glimpse at the banquet, not the shadow on the balcony, the complete picture. The flatness in his eyes was not emptiness. It was capacity, the look of a man who contained something vast and carefully governed, who had spent 2 years keeping it behind a door that was now for the first time swinging open. "The Syndicate will send ground teams," he said. His voice carried the clipped cadence of someone delivering a combat briefing. Their ships carry enough operatives to bypass your orbital defenses using stealth insertion technology your sensor grid was never designed to detect. They will be inside the palace perimeter within the hour. Your royal guard are disciplined and brave. But they have never fought humans like these. What should I expect? He paused, and for one moment something softer moved behind the mask. Not quite grief, something adjacent to it. The look of a person mourning a version of themselves that was already fading. Expect them to be faster than anything your people have fought. Expect them to be creative in ways your tactical doctrine does not account for. Expect them to use technology your forces have no countermeasure for. He hesitated. And Saravan, expect me to become someone you may not recognize. Someone I have spent 2 years trying to stop being. An alert shrieked through the armory speakers. The Syndicate fleet had deployed drop pods, 30 of them, streaking through the upper atmosphere on a direct trajectory for the palace complex. Davin checked his weapons one final time, settled his breathing with a long exhale that seemed to push away the last remnants of the man I knew, and moved toward the door with a stride that belonged entirely to someone else. I followed him, because whatever he was about to become, I needed to see it with my own eyes. Not through a tactical display, not through a briefing delivered after the fact, with my own eyes. Whatever that cost me. The pods struck the palace grounds like steel rain. Each one punched through the atmospheric defense shields that should have intercepted them. The shields died in cascading failures as electronic warfare pulses I had never encountered scrambled every targeting system in the complex. 30 pods, 30 Syndicate operatives in Terran exoframe armor, mechanical augmentation rigs that amplified every human reflex to levels our combat models had no category for. They deployed across the palace perimeter in a pattern that covered every entrance, every access point, every vulnerability in our defense grid, as though someone had given them a blueprint of the entire complex. In the command center, Admiral Orath watched the tactical display with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Fear. Not the controlled strategic concern of a commander assessing a difficult situation. Genuine fear. The kind that arrives when the assumptions your entire career is built on turn out to be wrong. Our guards are losing ground, he said. His voice was stripped of its usual authority. The Syndicate operatives are too fast. The mechanical frames amplify their speed and strength beyond anything in our combat databases. Our guards cannot acquire targets quickly enough to engage effectively. Davin spoke without looking away from the tactical display. They will reach the central wing in 12 minutes at this rate of advance. Our models project 14 minutes, one of my tactical officers said. Your models are wrong. They are running a standard three-prong clearance pattern. The eastern push is a feint. The real assault corridor is through the service tunnels beneath the north wing and through the rooftop maintenance access above the throne hall. They want to pin your forces between three converging fronts and collapse the defensive perimeter inward. You have approximately 8 minutes before the North Tunnel team reaches the central junction. The room went completely still. Every officer staring at him. How do you know that? Orath finally asked. Davin turned from the display and looked directly at the Admiral. No warmth, no humor, no trace of the man who had made the room laugh at a banquet table the night before. Because it is the same clearance pattern I designed for the Sol Confederation Marine Corps. 6 years ago, he said, the Syndicate stole it from our operational archives. They are using my own playbook against me. Silence. The kind that reshapes your understanding of the ground beneath your feet. I need 5 of your best remaining guards, Devon said. Pull every other unit back to the throne room and seal the blast doors. Do not engage the syndicate in the corridors. You will lose every exchange. Consolidate your defense in a single fortified position and give me freedom of movement in the approach corridors." Orath's face flushed. "I will not take tactical orders from a man who arranges table flowers. Then in 8 minutes, the syndicate will breach this room and kill or capture everyone in it," Davin said. "And they will do it using tactics I invented, wearing technology I helped develop, following protocols I wrote. The gardener is the only person on this planet who knows how to counter all of it. Your pride or your people, Admiral? Choose now." I stepped forward before Orath could respond. "Do as he says, immediately." Orath looked at me, then at Davin. The internal struggle crossed his face like weather across an open sky. And survival won. He issued the orders with a voice that cost him something to use. Davin took the 5 guards, moved into the corridors of the North Wing with a speed and purpose that transformed the air around him. He did not walk the way my guards walked. He moved the way predators move, low and fluid and aware of everything, each step placed with an economy of motion that wasted nothing. I was supposed to remain in the command center. I did not. I followed him into the corridor, because the man walking away from me was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And I needed to understand who he truly was before this day was over, before I made the decision that was already forming whether I was ready for it or not. He knew I was behind him. He did not stop, did not turn. He said over his shoulder in a voice stripped of everything except the information I needed to survive, "Stay behind me at all times. Do not step past my shoulder line. Do not touch anyone I put on the ground, even if they appear unconscious. Some of them will be faking, and they will still be armed." I said nothing. I stayed behind him, and I followed my husband into the dark. Part 2. The woman who decided to look. I had attended 47 military briefings in my life. I had sat at the head of war councils, reviewed casualty projections, authorized fleet deployments, signed documents that sent 10,000 soldiers into contested space, and then waited with the stillness that power requires for the reports to come back. I understood warfare in the abstract, the geometry of it, the mathematics. What I did not understand, what no briefing had ever prepared me for, was this. The North Wing corridor stretched ahead of us, lit by emergency panels that cast everything in pale amber. The kind of light that makes shadows look deeper than they are. The kind of light that does something to the air itself, makes it feel thinner, closer. Davin moved through it like he belonged to it. Not like a soldier advancing on a position, like something that had been waiting inside the amber light all along. Patient, particular, knowing exactly where it was going and seeing no reason to announce the fact. I stayed behind his shoulder line, the way he had told me, and I watched. The 5 guards moved in formation around us. Good soldiers, disciplined, trained in the finest combat academies the sovereignty had produced. They moved with the precision of people who had spent decades learning how to do this correctly. Davin moved differently. No formation, no pattern, nothing that could be predicted or countered. He moved the way water moves through cracks in stone, finding the path that offered least resistance, filling every available space, going where the geometry of the moment said to go, rather than where doctrine said to go. I had never seen anything like it, and I had seen a great many things. He stopped at the junction of 2 service corridors, held up one hand. We stopped. Complete stillness. The guards reading the signal and going still beside me. Not a sound, not even, it seemed, breath. Davin tilted his head slightly. listening to something I could not hear. Then he turned and looked at a maintenance access panel set into the corridor wall. Old panel, scratched around the edges from decades of routine use. Nothing about it that would make you look twice. He moved to it. 3 steps. Placed his hand flat against the wall beside it. Not on the panel itself, beside it, feeling for something. Then he opened a secondary access hatch I had not seen, hidden behind the panel frame, no larger than a service crawl space, leading into the wall cavity between the north wing's inner and outer structural layers. He did not explain. He simply reached in, retrieved a small communication device, matte black, no markings, something that had been placed there deliberately at some point in the past 2 years during some walk through this corridor that had looked to anyone watching like nothing more than a consort taking an unusual route back from the gardens. He entered a sequence into the device, one-handed, without looking at the keypad, a specific rhythm of presses. Then he replaced it in the cavity, closed the hatch, and kept walking. I followed and said nothing, because I was beginning to understand that what I was seeing was not improvisation, not a man reacting to a crisis, a man executing a plan he had built across 730 days of appearing to be harmless. The syndicate team came through the tunnel access exactly where Davin had said they would, exactly when he had said they would. 4 operatives in exoframe armor, moving in tight combat formation, the frames whirring softly as servos amplified every movement. They were fast, terrifyingly fast. They cleared the tunnel junction in seconds and began advancing toward the central wing in a leapfrog pattern that covered every angle of approach. And Devon was waiting for them, 20 meters from the junction, behind a structural column, in a shadow that the tunnel's emergency lighting did not reach. He had placed the 5 guards at intervals behind us, creating a layered fallback, telling each pair exactly which angles to cover, which weapons to use, which range to maintain based on the corridor geometry at their specific position. He had spoken to them in the clipped, precise cadence of a commander who had briefed hundreds of soldiers. And my Dalkane guards, who had never taken orders from a human being in their lives, had responded to his authority as though it had always been there, as though they had been waiting for someone who knew what they were doing. The first operative came through, scanning the corridor with a weapon-mounted sensor system, moving exactly as Doctrine said to move. Davin stepped out of the shadow. One lateral movement, so precise it looked choreographed. Inside the sweep of the sensor arc, inside the operative's guard before the man could register what was happening. He stripped the combat rifle from the operative's hands using a motion that leveraged the exoframe's own joint structure against itself. I heard the sound. A sharp mechanical crack as the operative's wrist gave way inside the armored gauntlet. Davin drove the stock of the captured rifle into the gap between the helmet and neck guard. One motion. The operative dropped like a string had been cut. He was already moving before the body touched the floor. The second and third operatives opened fire. The corridor lit up with weapons discharge, blue-white flashes strobing against the amber emergency lights. Davin rolled behind a support column, fired his sidearm twice. 2 shots, both finding the inner elbow seams of the exoframe armor. The gap there was barely 2 centimeters. He hit both operatives while moving, from 15 meters, in the time it took me to draw one breath. Both staggered. Arm servos lost power. They reached for secondary weapons. He was already closing the distance. He put them down with strikes that targeted the remaining gaps in their armor with a precision I can only describe as anatomical. He knew every seam, every joint, Every place where the engineering of the armor had to make a concession to the biology of the person wearing it, because he had trained with the same equipment, because he had helped design the countermeasures. The fourth operative charged 200 kilograms of armored soldier driven by servo-amplified momentum. Devon sidestepped, caught the extended arm, used the forward momentum to redirect the man into the corridor wall. The wall's structural plating cracked. The operative crumpled. Silence. 4 soldiers. Trained, armored, augmented. Devon. 10 seconds. No armor. The 5 guards behind me had not fired a single round. There had been no time. He had moved through the syndicate operatives faster than trained soldiers could acquire targets. He stood in the corridor, checked each corner with the systematic thoroughness of someone reading a page, left to right, top to bottom, patient, thorough. His breathing was even, no shaking, no adrenaline tremor, no change in his respiration at all. This was not fighting, not in any sense I had a word for. Dalkane combat was built on centuries of martial tradition that prize form and discipline. What Davin had done had no form, no drama, no ceremony. It was close and absolutely efficient, and it worked with a perfection that made my blood run cold. Because it was not what he had become in that corridor. It was what he had always been. He ejected his magazine, checked the remaining rounds, reloaded. The motion was involuntary, automatic as breathing. I stepped beside him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Tell me everything. Now. He did not look at me immediately. He was scanning the corridor ahead, reading the geometry of the next intersection in a way I could not see, but he was apparently processing as naturally as reading text. When he turned, his eyes held something I had not seen before. Not guilt, not the clinical detachment of the fight. Something in between. Something that existed in the space between what he had been and what he had spent 2 years trying to become. My operational designation was Commander Davin Ress, he said. I was the field leader of Unit Obsidian, a 4-person Terran kill team attached to the Sol Confederation's Special Activities Division. Over a 3-year deployment, my unit carried out 17 deep cover operations, targeting the Harrow Syndicate's leadership infrastructure. He paused, checked the corridor again. We identified their command nodes, infiltrated their communication networks, dismantled their organizational chain from the inside. We destroyed everything they built. Another pause. When the operation concluded, the Confederation decided I was a liability. Not because I had failed, because I had succeeded too completely. The skills I used to dismantle the syndicate could be turned against any organization, including the Confederation itself. So they erased my service record, created a new identity, and placed me in the most harmless, most unreachable assignment they could find. He looked at me. You. I held his gaze. You reviewed several possible cover placements, I said. Why did you choose Athara? He was quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought he would not answer. Because the cultural briefing described a civilization that valued patience, he said finally, and the cultivation of things that required time to grow. I wanted to learn how to do that. I had spent 3 years destroying things very efficiently. I wanted to try the other direction. He looked away before I could respond, and kept walking. The syndicate adapted. Davin had told me they would. Adaptability, he said, was the most dangerous thing about them. They learned from failure faster than any conventional military force he had encountered. They shared information across their tactical network in real time. Every failed approach was cataloged and countered within seconds. The team that came through the rooftop access points had already adjusted their formation. spreading wider, maintaining greater distance between operators, denying the clustered targets he had exploited in the tunnel junction. 8 operatives rappelling into the throne hall from above. The remaining syndicate forces redoubling their push through the eastern corridors, stretching our defenses across multiple fronts simultaneously. Devon repositioned the guards at the throne room's secondary entrances, told each pair exactly what to do, specific instructions, specific angles, specific weapons based on the corridor geometry of their position. He spoke to them in the same clipped cadence as before, and they listened, every one of them. Even the veterans of the border campaigns who had spent decades perfecting their craft and had never once taken a tactical order from anyone who was not Del Kane. They listened because something in his voice made not listening feel like a mistake you would regret. Then he moved to the primary approach corridor himself. Each engagement was different. He never repeated a tactic. Against a lone operative in the West Corridor, he closed distance and neutralized the threat at arm's length, using the man's armored bulk against him. Against a pair that tried to flank him near the council chambers, he created an angle that forced them to choose between engaging him or hitting each other, then dropped both in the half-second of hesitation that choice created. Against a 3-person team that breached the South Passage, he triggered the palace fire suppression system to flood the corridor with chemical vapor, then moved through the cloud using sound and spatial memory to locate each target while their sensors struggled with the interference. He knew what their technology could do and what it could not do because he had trained with it, alongside people who were now wearing it. He was fighting a mirror of himself, and the mirror could not keep up because the original was always one step ahead of the reflection. But there were too many of them. The palace was too large, the entry points too numerous, and even Davin could not be in every corridor at once. The syndicate was herding us inward, toward the throne room, collapsing the defensive perimeter exactly the way the 3-prong clearance pattern was designed to collapse it. We fell back through the south corridor, through the gallery, through the antechamber with its 900-year-old tapestries that depicted the founding of the sovereignty and that I had walked past 10,000 times without looking at them properly. And Devon, moving ahead of me, paused at the junction of the antechamber and the throne hall approach, looked at the maintenance console set into the wall, placed his hand on it. I watched his fingers move across the keypad. Fast. Practiced. A specific sequence that I would later understand was the second confirmation ping of a standing order that had been waiting dormant for exactly this moment. The same rhythm as before. 14 presses. Deliberate. He removed his hand, kept moving. I followed, and understood in that moment that every corridor we had traveled through tonight had served 2 purposes: eliminating syndicate operatives and bringing him to this specific console at this specific moment for this specific reason. Nothing wasted, nothing accidental. Every step tonight had been part of something larger than I had been able to see. The blast doors of the throne room were marked by cutting tools when we entered. White-hot scores in the metal. The syndicate already working on them from the outside. My remaining guards had consolidated inside. Palace staff who had taken shelter when the fighting began stood against the far wall. Ainara was there. Captain Vorath, his left shoulder wrapped in field dressing his leg in a temporary brace, still standing, still present. And on the tactical display that someone had managed to bring online inside the throne room, the orbital picture was deteriorating. Davin looked at the display for 3 seconds. Then he turned to me. "There is one more thing you should know," he said. His voice was quiet, the briefing cadence gone, something more personal beneath it now. My handler during the infiltration phase of the syndicate operation spent 14 months embedded inside their organization alongside me, passing intelligence back to the Confederation. I trusted this person completely, more than I have trusted anyone in my professional life. He paused. They turned, took the syndicate's remaining assets and intelligence archives, used them to rebuild the entire network with themselves at the head. This person is not coming here to destroy us. They are coming here to recruit me. I looked at him. And this person, I said carefully, is on that ship. He is, yes. The blast doors shuddered, a focused cutting beam scoring the inner surface, sparks cascading across the floor in white arcs. And then a voice came through the throne room's communication system, calm, controlled, carrying the confidence of someone who has already decided how this ends. Pale Horse, I know you are in there. I watched your work on the way in. 14 of my operatives down in under 20 minutes. You have not lost a step. Davin did not move, did not respond to the voice immediately. He said quietly just to me, his name is K.L. Voss. He was the best operative I had ever worked with. Brilliant, impossible to read. I trusted him with everything. He used that trust to disappear with enough classified intelligence to reconstruct everything we destroyed. And now he is here. Now he is here. The blast doors shuddered again, cutting marks deepening. Voss's voice came through again. I did not come here to fight you. I came to make you an offer. The Syndicate has a new operation, larger than anything we have attempted. And I need someone who thinks the way you think, someone who sees the patterns before they form. Come out, take your place beside me again, and the princess and her people walk away unharmed. Davin looked at me, both versions of him visible in that look, layered on top of each other like two images on the same page. The man who planted flowers and the man who had just moved through my palace like a force of nature, the husband and the soldier, the person he had been and the person he had spent 2 years choosing not to be. Both of them looking at me with the same expression, and the expression was not conflict, it was resolution. He had already decided he would not be going with Kel Voss. What he had not yet decided was whether I would understand why. Stay behind the throne, he said. Then he turned to face the buckling doors, and his breathing settled into the slow metronomic rhythm I had heard on the balcony at night, the rhythm of a man who had trained his body to remain calm in situations that demanded the opposite. I did not move behind the throne. I moved beside Captain Vorath, who looked at me with the assessing eyes of a career soldier and said nothing, because he was Dalkane and because he understood that there are moments when a person's position is the only statement that matters. I stood beside my guard commander in the throne room of the Dalkane sovereignty, and I waited. The doors fell inward with a grinding shriek of torn metal. Smoke poured through the gap, thick, acrid, the smell of superheated alloy. Through the haze, Kael Voss walked into my throne room. He was not what I had expected, tall, silver-haired, the kind of lean that comes from a body that has been treated as a tool for so long it no longer carries anything unnecessary. He moved with the same economy I had seen in Devon, the same awareness, the same quality of a person who is always reading the room they are entering. But where Davin's awareness had over 2 years developed a softness around the edges, a genuine interest in the people and things around him, Voss carried none of that. He processed the room the way a machine processes data, quickly, without attachment to what he found. He stopped 10 meters from Davin, 6 personal guards fanning out in a close protection formation that covered every angle of fire. His eyes moved across the throne room, across the fallen operatives, across my guards, across me, then settled on Davin with an expression that contained both recognition and something darker. Hunger. The hunger of a man who has spent years searching for something and has finally found it exactly where he left it. No armor, he said. No exoframe. Garden soil still under your fingernails. You brought 6, Davian said. That is flattering. You should have brought more. Voss's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. The expression of someone who has heard something that confirms what they already suspected. You always were the best, Voss said, even when you were pretending to be someone's tame pet. I was never pretending, Devon said. I was trying to become someone different. You would not understand the distinction. Voss tilted his head, studying Davin the way a craftsman studies their finest work. The Confederation abandoned you, he said. They erased your records. They wiped your identity. They shipped you to the far edge of map space because you frightened them. Not because you failed, because you succeeded too well. You proved that a single operative properly trained and properly motivated could dismantle an entire organization from the inside. That kind of capability is not an asset. It is a threat. Davin did not deny it. I accepted being erased, he said. I accepted the assignment. I accepted all of it. Because the alternative was becoming exactly what you became. And what did I become? Exactly what they trained us to be. No restraint, no boundaries, no part of yourself held back from the work. Voss spread his hand slightly, the gesture of a man making an obvious point. And yet, here you are, standing in a room full of people who cannot protect themselves without you. The flowers and the cooking and the charming little domestic act. That was never you. This is you. This has always been you. Something moved in my chest. Not anger exactly. Anger was something I managed, contained, directed. This was different. This was the feeling of watching someone walk into your house, break your walls, threaten your people, and then presume to tell you who the man standing beside you truly is. As though 2 years of observation meant nothing. As though every small true thing I had accumulated across 730 days of living beside this person was simply evidence of an act, a performance, a man playing at being human in some deeper sense than the biological. As though Cale Voss, who had spent 30 seconds looking at Devon across a smoke-filled throne room, understood him better than I did. I stepped forward. I do not know exactly where the impulse came from. I had not planned it. I had been standing beside Vorath, watching, doing what I had always done. And then I was moving. Because some things become clear not when you reason your way to them, but when someone says something so wrong that your whole body knows it before your mind catches up. Voss turned to look at me. His eyes were sharp, assessing. The eyes of a man who had spent his career evaluating threats and determining whether they required a response. He decided I did not, which was his first mistake. The princess speaks, he said. I was wondering when the royal audience would begin. You are standing in the throne room of the Dalkane sovereignty, I said, and my voice carried the full weight of 9,000 years of unbroken imperial authority. Not because I was performing, because it was simply true. Because I had grown up carrying this weight and I knew exactly how to let it be heard. This palace, this planet, this system, these stars, they belong to my people. And the man you are trying to reclaim has chosen to stand in front of me, not beside you. Voss watched me. He chose to protect people he was under no obligation to protect. He chose to plant flowers in soil that is not his own, on a world that is not his home, among a species that treated him as a curiosity rather than an equal. He memorized the names of every guard in this palace within his first month, not because it served his mission, because he believed they deserved to be known. I held Voss's gaze without blinking. Those are not the actions of a man in disguise. Those are the actions of a man deciding who he wants to be, every single day, whether anyone was watching or not. And you do not get to walk into my home and tell me otherwise. Voss looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Davin. Is she always this direct? Davin's voice quiet. She is the heir to an empire that has survived longer than your species has had written language. She has earned the right. Something recalibrated in Voss's expression. The slight adjustment of a man who has encountered a variable he did not account for. Then he reached for the control interface on his wrist guard, and the calculation in his eyes went flat. Enough, he said. All units, commence orbital bombardment of the Palace complex. Authorization Voss 7. My blood went cold. I looked at Devan, expecting desperation, expecting the scramble for an impossible solution that did not exist. Instead, he looked almost relieved, the way a person looks when something they planned for finally happens exactly as planned. I was hoping you would give that order, he said. Voss's finger hovered over the wrist control. What? When you activated the orbital bombardment protocol, your cruiser's primary communication array opened a two-way tactical channel with the surface. That channel is now carrying a secondary signal on a sub-band frequency that your shipboard electronic warfare suite does not monitor. What signal? A coded burst on a Sol Confederation black channel, a frequency decommissioned from the official registry 3 years ago. The Confederation never actually shuts down a black channel, they just stop admitting it exists. I sent the first confirmation ping using the communication device I placed in the north wing wall cavity during my 4th month of residence, and the second ping from the maintenance console on the throne hall approach corridor. The protocol requires 2 independent surface confirmations before the standing order activates. Voss's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. What standing order? The one I negotiated before I accepted this assignment, Devon said. I agreed to serve as the anchor point, the fixed location that would draw you out. In exchange, the Confederation agreed to maintain a passive observation presence in this system, ready to activate on confirmed signal. He looked at Voss steadily. I gambled that someone on the other end was still listening. Joran Thace specifically, who has been running the passive observation rotation since the beginning, who received my first confirmation ping in the North Wing corridor, and my second ping from the maintenance console minutes ago. The throne room shook, not from orbital bombardment, from something happening in the space above our world. Something violent enough to transmit through planetary crust and palace foundations and the 900-year-old stone beneath our feet. Every tactical display in the room flickered to life as the sensor grid rebooted, and what the screens showed stopped every person in the chamber mid-breath. 3 vessels had materialized in orbit. Sol Confederation stealth destroyers, angular and predatory, hull profiles unlike any Terran vessel in any database the Sovereignty possessed. They had been there the entire time, hidden in the electromagnetic interference zones of Athara's magnetic poles, maintaining silent running, watching, waiting. Now they were engaging the Syndicate fleet. The speed and precision of it was extraordinary. The Syndicate cruiser was crippled in the first exchange, Two Confederation destroyers bracketing it from opposing vectors, stripping its weapons arrays with surgical precision that disabled offensive capability without destroying the ship. The two frigates attempted to break for open space. The third destroyer cut off their escape trajectory with the casual efficiency of a trained hand redirecting something that had wandered somewhere it should not be. Terran military technology against Terran criminal technology. A generation of difference, showing in every exchange. Voss watched the orbital display. His face did not collapse. He was too disciplined for that, too controlled. But something behind his eyes dimmed, the slow dimming of something that has been sustaining itself on certainty, and the certainty has just run out. They were watching you, he said, the whole time. They were always watching me, Devon replied. The Confederation did not abandon me, Kale. They relocated me. There is a difference. And you missed it because you assumed they thought the way you think. You believe they erased me because I was too dangerous to keep. He looked at Voss steadily. The truth is the opposite. They kept me because I was too valuable to lose. They put me here, in a place where I would be comfortable and visible and genuinely invested in staying. And they waited. Because they knew that sooner or later you would come looking. You could not help yourself. I was the one target you could never leave alone. You were bait, Voss said. I was an anchor. You came to me. You brought your fleet. You showed the Confederation the full scale of what you rebuilt. 5 ships, a carrier, hundreds of operatives, enough military hardware to violate the territorial boundary of an allied empire. 1 corvette they might have monitored and dismissed. This fleet is enough to authorize a full military sweep of every syndicate cell in known space. Davin paused. You did not walk into a trap, KL. You built the justification for your own destruction and delivered it personally. Voss's hand moved toward his belt, toward a small device clipped there. Subtle, almost unconscious. The reflex of a man reaching for a last contingency. Davin shook his head slowly. The dead man trigger linked to the Palace fusion core, he said. The one your advance team planted during the initial breach. Behind the tertiary coolant manifold on sublevel 4. Clever placement. Shielded from standard scans by the reactor's own magnetic field. Voss's hand went still. I found it and disarmed it over an hour ago, Devon said, while your forces believed I was engaged in the North Wing corridors. I was never pinned down there. I was moving through the palace on a specific route, sweeping your team's insertion points for secondary devices while simultaneously directing your forces toward a single location. This room, where they would be contained when the Confederation fleet arrived. Every engagement in those corridors served 2 purposes: eliminating operatives and herding survivors inward. The realization crossed Voss's face like a shadow passing over still water. He had committed every resource, played every card, and the man he had come to recruit had been managing his entire operation from the moment he entered the system. You could have triggered the signal immediately, Voss said quietly. You could have had me arrested in the first 5 minutes. I needed the Confederation to see your fleet fully deployed, Davin said. A single corvette is a nuisance. 5 warships violating the territorial boundary of an allied empire is an act of war. That distinction matters in the council chambers, where authorization for full military action requires evidence of proportional threat. Voss closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fight was gone. What remained was something I did not entirely expect. Respect. Tired, bitter, genuine. You used me, he said. I learned from the best, Devon said. The blast doors opened one final time, and the figures who came through wore matte black tactical armor with no insignia. Confederation Marines, moving in precise diamond formation, weapons covering every hostile contact in the room with the same terrifying competence I had just spent 2 hours watching. Behind them, a man I had not seen before. Stocky, scarred jaw, the calm, experienced eyes of someone who has seen enough that very little surprises them anymore. He approached David and snapped to attention. The salute he gave held something beyond formality, something that had been waiting to be given for a long time. Commander Ress, Lieutenant Joran Thace, Sol Confederation Special Activities Division 3rd Fleet. We have secured orbital superiority and are processing syndicate prisoners. That designation does not exist anymore, Lieutenant. Thace's mouth curved, the smile of a soldier delivering a message he has rehearsed. It does on our books, sir. It always has. Davin looked at him for a long moment, and something in his expression broke open slightly. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see beneath the operational mask and the tactical precision and the controlled capability the man who had sent a signal into the dark 3 years ago and had not known until tonight whether anyone had received it. Kyle Voss was taken into custody without resistance. He walked between two Marines with his chin raised and his eyes forward, the posture of a man who refuses to show that anything has gone wrong. As he passed Devon, he stopped, spoke one word, "Gardens." Davin said nothing. He watched Voss go, and then he stood in the center of the ruined throne room, surrounded by unconscious operatives and shell-shocked Dalkane guards, and the settling dust of a battle that had taken everything I thought I understood about the man I had married and rearranged it into something I did not yet have a shape for. He turned to me. The operational mask was fading. Beneath it, I could see exhaustion and honesty and something fragile that I recognized, though I had never seen it on his face before. He was afraid, not of the Syndicate, not of the Confederation Marines, not of the political consequences that were already beginning to form in my mind like storm clouds. Afraid of me, of what I now knew, of what I might decide. "We need to talk," I said. "I know," he said. And for the first time since the doors had fallen inward and Kale Voss had walked into my home, Davon Ress looked like what he had been trying to become for the past 2 years. Not a soldier, not a weapon, just a man. Standing in the aftermath of something he had survived, waiting to find out if surviving it was enough. Part 3, What She Chose to See. The throne room smelled like burned metal and cold stone. And something else, something underneath. The faint, stubborn trace of soil. Earth from the garden terrace carried in on the sleeves of a man who had been planting flowers that morning and dismantling an invasion force by afternoon. I stood in the center of it, looking at the damage. The blast doors torn from their housings, the scorched floor where the cutting beam had done its work, the unconscious operatives being secured by Confederation Marines with the brisk efficiency of people who had done this many times before, the tactical displays still cycling through orbital engagement data, red indicators fading as the Syndicate fleet was systematically neutralized above our world. And Davin, standing near the far wall, talking quietly with Joran Thace. His voice was low. Thace was listening with the focused attention of a soldier receiving new orders from a commander he had not expected to see again. I watched, because watching was what I did, what I had always done. The careful accumulation of small true things that had been my primary method of understanding the world since before I could articulate what I was doing or why. And what I saw now was a man I did not recognize on the surface, and recognized completely underneath. The operational posture was still there, the weight distributed across his feet in that particular way, The eyes that moved across a room in systematic sweeps. The breathing that stayed controlled even when everything around him was anything but. All of it still present. But beneath the architecture of discipline that 2 decades of training had built into him at a level below conscious thought, the man who had asked me about flower colors, still there. Also still there. Captain Vorath found me before I found him. He moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a significant injury and refusing to acknowledge it. The field dressing on his shoulder was holding. His leg braced and functional carried him across the throne room floor with a steadiness that said more about his character than any service record. He stopped beside me, looked at the space where Davin had been standing before Thace drew him toward the tactical display for a debrief. "Your husband saved 2 of my guards tonight," he said. "I know, I was there, you were there, but I want to make sure you understand what you saw." He turned to look at me directly. The way career soldiers look at people when they have decided something needs to be said, and they are going to say it regardless of rank or protocol or whether the moment is convenient. "He was in active engagement," Vorath said. 2 syndicate operatives advancing on his position. He had a clear path to the objective. Standard tactical logic says you do not break from an active engagement to recover casualties who have no strategic value to your mission. I waited. He broke. He crossed 4 meters of open corridor under active fire. He applied a field medical technique I have never seen before. He kept both of them alive, and he did it while maintaining visual contact on the corridor and continuing to direct the guards behind him. Vorath paused. "A pure weapon steps over the body's highness. It calculates and moves on. That is what a weapon does. That is the only thing a weapon does." He met my eyes. What I watched tonight was not a weapon. It was a man who happened to have capabilities that most weapons do not. And those are not the same thing, not even close. He inclined his head, the formal acknowledgement of a Dalkane officer, and moved away. I stood with what he had said, turned it over, held it alongside everything else I had been holding for 2 years. The medical wing was organized chaos when I walked through it. Staff moving in patterns that looked random and were not. Injuries being triaged and treated with the efficient calm of people trained for exactly this. The wounded guards of my palace, some of them people whose names I knew, some of them people whose names Devon had known before I did. I walked through it slowly and thought about Kyle Voss standing in my throne room saying that the domestic life was never real, that the flowers and the cooking and the careful, genuine attention Devon had paid to the people around him for 2 years was performance, camouflage, a costume designed for a man who was at his core something else entirely. The most dangerous thing about Voss, I had decided, was not his military capability. It was his certainty, the absolute unquestioned certainty that he understood what Devon Rest was, that he had made Devon what he was in some essential way and therefore knew him better than anyone else ever could. That kind of certainty was seductive. It offered a simple answer to a complicated question, and simple answers were always the most dangerous kind. The diplomatic fallout began before the fires on the ground had been fully extinguished. My father was informed within the hour. I know this because the transmission light on the command center's long-range communication panel went active shortly after the engagement ended and stayed active for 2 hours, which meant someone on my father's staff had decided this was urgent enough to maintain a continuous open channel rather than the standard back and forth of diplomatic correspondence, which meant the emperor was not pleased, an understatement so significant it approached comedy. I did not take the transmission personally. I asked Inara to record everything and inform the Emperor that I would respond fully within 12 hours. Inara looked at me with the expression she reserved for moments when she was processing something that fell outside her considerable experience. Then she went to do it, because she trusted me. The way the guards trusted Davin when he told them exactly which angles to cover and exactly what to do. The way trust actually works, not as a decision made once, but as something built, accumulated, one small true thing at a time across a long enough period that the accumulation becomes something solid enough to stand on. I found him in our chambers, not because I had decided to go there, not because I had planned what I was going to say, because I had been moving through the palace for 2 hours dealing with the immediate practical consequences of an invasion, and at some point my feet had simply taken me to where he was. He was standing by the window, looking down at the garden terrace. The damage was significant. The drop pods had cratered the grounds. The raised planter beds he had built by hand over 3 months of careful weekend work were broken and scattered. The Valesi blossoms, the ones he had been tending that very morning, were crushed into the upturned soil. Blue and white petals scattered across broken earth like something beautiful that had been carelessly destroyed. He did not turn when I entered. He knew my footsteps, the way he knew everything about this palace. Completely, without apparent effort. We stood in silence for a moment, the window between us and the damaged garden below. The night outside quiet now in the way that follows something catastrophic and leaves the air feeling rearranged. What was real, I said. Not an accusation. A question. The actual question. The one underneath all the other questions. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, repair crews moved across the grounds with lights and equipment. Inside our chambers, the silence held itself with the weight of something that has been compressed for too long and is now expanding into whatever space it is finally allowed to occupy. I need you to understand something, he said finally. His voice was different, the briefing cadence gone, the operational flatness gone. What was left was something I had not heard before, stripped down to something that had not been designed for any audience. The cover identity the Confederation built for me was constructed to be as different from my operational profile as possible: gentle, open, domestic, interested in gardens and cooking and social engagement. None of those traits were supposed to be genuine. They were camouflage. A costume designed to make me invisible inside an environment where the real me would have been immediately suspicious. He paused. That is not what I asked. He turned to face me. And what I saw stripped everything away. Every layer. The operational mask and the diplomatic smile and the careful performance of harmlessness and every other thing he had been in whatever order across however many years. All of it gone. What remained was a man standing at the exact intersection of two versions of himself, unable to fully release either one, looking at me as though I was the most important variable in an equation he had been running for 2 years and had just reached the moment of solving. Somewhere in the first year, he said, I stopped performing. I waited. The flowers became real. I planted them because I wanted to watch something grow that I had not destroyed. The cooking became real. Feeding people felt like the opposite of everything I had done for 3 years. Learning the names of the guards was real. He looked at me directly. I learned them because I wanted to belong somewhere that was not built on classified briefings and operational security. I wanted to be known as a person rather than a designation, and I wanted to know the people around me the same way. A pause. I asked you about the flower colors because your opinion mattered to me, not because the mission called for it, Not because it served any purpose I had been assigned, because you were the person I had breakfast with every morning, and I wanted to know what you thought. He said it the way he said everything real, without drama, without the performance of emotion, just the fact of it laid out plainly. I was trained to become anyone Saravan, to adopt any identity, any set of mannerisms, any version of a person that the situation required. The problem is that somewhere in the process of becoming someone who wanted to stay, I lost the ability to tell where the performance ended and the reality began. He looked at me, and then I stopped looking for the line, because it stopped mattering. Because whatever was real and whatever had started as performance had become the same thing. And the same thing was this place, these people, you. I crossed the room, stood directly in front of him. This human being with his heavier bones and his gray eyes that were always watching things a little more carefully than the situation required. This man who was the most dangerous person I had ever met, and who looked at me as though I was the dangerous one, as though my next words held the only power left in the room that he had no countermeasure for. Then stay, I said. The formal Seoul Confederation delegation arrived 6 days later. Ambassador Niraloth. Silver-streaked hair measured patience, the composure of someone who had spent an entire career explaining human actions to alien governments and had developed a settled, almost meditative acceptance of the fact that the explanations were rarely going to be received well. She stood before my father's council with the calm of someone who had prepared for every possible response and was therefore surprised by none of them. Commander Ress was placed in the Dalkane court under a dual-purpose arrangement, she said, choosing each word with care. The marriage represented a sincere gesture of goodwill. We valued the relationship with the sovereignty. The secondary purpose was protective custody. The Confederation needed Commander Ress hidden in a location the Harrow Syndicate could not easily reach. And we needed a capable operative in sovereign allied space who could respond to Terran origin threats if they materialized beyond our borders. You placed a trained operative in my daughter's household, my father said. His voice carried the cold that 40 years of imperial authority produces in a man who has decided to be displeased and is not going to be talked out of it, and called it diplomacy. We placed a protector beside your daughter, Ambassador Loth said. The distinction is meaningful. Commander Ress specifically requested a non-combat assignment following the completion of the Obsidian operation. He was psychologically evaluated, cleared, and given a choice between several available placements. He chose the Dalkane assignment, I said. Loth turned to me and nodded. He reviewed his options and selected this one. When asked why, he said the culture valued patience and the cultivation of things that required time to grow. He said those were things he wanted to learn. He chose it, I said again. He was not assigned. He was not assigned. Loth confirmed. My father dismissed the delegation without resolution, which meant he was processing, which meant there was still a conversation to be had. That evening, he summoned me to his study. 40 years of governance lived in that room, in the worn surface of the desk, the particular arrangement of documents that never changed, the window that looked out over the eastern quarter of the palace grounds and the stars beyond. He wanted Davin removed, the marriage dissolved, the human returned to Sol space immediately. He said he is dangerous, Sir Raven. He is a soldier who chose to stop being a soldier. He deceived you. He was ordered to. And when the moment came to choose between following those orders and protecting this court, he chose us. He fought because that is what weapons do when you point them at a target. I looked at my father. Weapons do not plant Valesi blossoms, I said. Weapons do not memorize the names of every guard in a palace within their first month of arrival. Weapons do not cook meals for servants who have never been cooked for. Weapons do not ask their wife which color flowers to put on a banquet table and then arrange them to catch the chandelier light. He chose those things every single day for 2 years, not because anyone required it, not because the mission called for it, because he decided that was who he wanted to be. My father studied me with the calculating gaze of a man who had held an empire together for 4 decades, who understood power in every form it took, who had spent a lifetime watching people and determining what they were made of. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked through the window toward the direction of the garden terrace. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want my husband to stay, and I want you to see him clearly. Not as a security risk, not as a diplomatic problem, as a person who had every reason to become something terrible and chose every morning to be something else." My father said nothing, which with him was not the same as no. The full assembly of the Dalkane court convened 3 days later. The Great Hall, the council members, military leadership, diplomatic corps, all of them in ordered ranks. The attention that fills a room when everyone present understands that something is about to be decided that cannot be undecided. Davin stood at the very back of the chamber, near the main doors. Positioned, I noticed as though he was prepared to leave if the decision went against him. Not cornered, not resistant, simply ready to accept the outcome and remove himself from the equation if that was what was required. He had the training and capability to command any room he entered. He could project authority that would silence the court through sheer force of presence. He could argue, persuade, demonstrate, perform. Instead, he stood quietly at the rear of the chamber with his hands folded in front of him and waited for a princess to decide his fate, letting me lead. I walked to the center of the hall. No prepared text, no speech written out and rehearsed. The things I needed to say did not exist in the register of formal address. They live somewhere more particular than that. "The council has recommended the removal of my consort Davin Ress," I said, "on the grounds that his presence constitutes an unacceptable security risk to the sovereignty." The room was very still. "I am here to formally reject that recommendation." Murmurs, immediate, rising. I raised one hand. "Davin Ress is my consort by law and by choice. He has lived among us for 2 years. He has respected our customs, contributed to our household, invested himself in this community with a sincerity that many born into this court have never matched." I paused. "When enemies came to our gates armed with weapons our defense forces could not counter, and employing tactics our military had no training against, he placed himself between those enemies and our people without hesitation. He asked no permission. He negotiated no terms. He did not stop to calculate what he was owed or what the outcome would mean for his own position. He saw people in danger, and he acted." The room was very quiet now. But that is not why I am standing here today. I let the silence hold for a moment. I am standing here because of what happened before the doors fell inward. Because of 2 years of small true things that no one else was paying attention to. The names of the guards, the meals cooked for servants who were not his responsibility. The flowers arranged to catch the chandelier light because someone had asked him a question and he had decided that the answer to that question mattered. My voice did not waver, because I was not performing. I was simply describing what I had seen, what I had accumulated across 730 days of living beside a person and paying attention. He told me once that he chose this place because our culture valued patience and the cultivation of things that take time to grow. And then he spent 2 years practicing exactly that. Not because anyone required it, not because it served any purpose he had been assigned, because he decided it was who he wanted to become. I looked at the council, at the military leadership, at the faces of people who had spent 2 years tolerating my husband as a diplomatic curiosity and had discovered last week that they had been catastrophically wrong about what he was. If this sovereignty wishes to remove a man who made that choice, I said you will first need to remove me. The hall erupted, voices cascading, some angry, some cautiously something else. The legal scholars reaching for precedent, the military strategists reaching for threat assessment, the old guard officers like Admiral Orath arguing that the deception alone was grounds for expulsion regardless of outcome, and the younger members of the diplomatic corps countering with something that the older guard was struggling to process, that the outcome was precisely the point, that a man who bleeds for a nation not his own has proven his allegiance more thoroughly than any oath sworn in ceremony. I stood at the center of it and held my ground, not because I had prepared for every argument, but because beneath the preparation and the imperial posture and the decades of training in how to navigate rooms exactly like this one, there was something simpler. I had watched my husband choose, over and over and over, to be gentle when being dangerous would have been easier, to be present when being invisible would have been safer, to ask about flower colors when he could have been building operational advantages. And I was not going to let anyone punish him for that. My father was not watching me. He was watching Devan. I knew this because I had spent my entire life reading my father's face, and his gaze had moved to the back of the hall within the first minute of my address and had not moved since. And Davin was standing at the rear of the chamber, hands folded, head slightly bowed, waiting. He had the capability to change the temperature of that room, to make everyone in it understand without a word exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. He had demonstrated that capability extensively over the past week. He was choosing not to use it, standing one step behind his wife, in a room full of people deciding his fate, letting me speak, letting me lead. And my father, who had spent 40 years watching people who wanted power and the lengths they would go to in order to get it, was watching a man who had every tool required to seize influence in the Dalkane court and was choosing to stand quietly at the back of the room. I saw the moment my father understood, a slight shift in his expression, the particular adjustment of a man who has just calculated something he did not expect to calculate and has arrived at a conclusion that surprises him. He looked at Devan, at the stillness, at the choice the stillness represented, and he made his decision. He did not announce it that day, but he did not order the removal, which was the same thing in the language of imperial governance as a verdict. 1 week later, a new position was created within the sovereignty's diplomatic and security structure. Terran liaison to the Dalkane Imperial Court. No precedent, no formal job description, no established protocols. A position built from nothing, which in the history of a 9,000-year-old empire that had protocols for everything was the most extraordinary thing about it. The position was offered to Devan. He accepted it the way he accepted everything. A quiet nod, a word of thanks that was not performed. No visible pride or triumph. No speeches. He simply nodded. And then he asked Inara if she knew where the palace botanical wing kept its Valesi seedling. I found him that evening on the garden terrace. The sun was going down over Athara's western ridge, the sky amber and violet, and the particular deep blue that preceded the first stars. The air warm, carrying the smell of turned soil and something green and new. Davin was on his knees in the dirt, planting. He had sourced fresh Valesi seedlings from the botanical wing, and he was setting each one into the carefully turned earth with the same precise, gentle movements I had watched him use in the armory to handle weapons he had not touched in 2 years. The same hands, the same focus, different purpose entirely. I stood at the edge of the terrace for a moment, watching. The repair crews had cleared most of the debris. The pod craters were filled, the broken planter beds replaced. The soil was fresh and dark and waiting. He did not look up, but he knew I was there. I crossed the terrace and knelt beside him. The soil was warm from the day's sun, rich, soft in the way of earth that has been recently turned and is still settling into itself. I picked up a seedling, held it uncertainly. He reached over without looking, adjusted my grip, repositioned my fingers so the root ball would sit naturally when I placed it in the ground. His hands on mine, steady and certain in the way of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and sees no reason to make a production of it. We planted together, in silence, for a long time. The palace moved around us, distant murmur of communication systems, the low hum of repair equipment, the faint sound of the evening shift of guards changing positions on the eastern wall. But on the terrace, only the sound of soil and the soft click of a gardening tool and the occasional evening bird from the ornamental trees at the terrace's edge. "I am not afraid of you," I said. He did not look up. His hands continued their careful work. "You should be. I am not afraid of Pale Horse Divan. I married the man who chose to plant flowers instead of writing." He stopped. His hands rested in the earth, still and steady, and he looked at me with an expression that held nothing back. No operational mask, no careful performance, no camouflage of any kind. What I saw was a man who had been given every reason to become something terrible, who carried inside him a capacity for controlled destruction that would make the most hardened warriors in my empire step back, who had lived for 3 years inside an organization that rewarded the most violent applications of that capacity and had walked away from it, and who had spent the following 2 years kneeling in dirt, coaxing life from soil, learning the names of strangers, asking about flower colors. Not because he had forgotten what he was capable of, because he remembered, and he had decided to be something else anyway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me stay." I did not answer with words. I picked up a seedling and placed it in the soil beside his, pressed the earth gently around its base the way he had shown me. And we worked together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared above us in the Atharan sky. We moved down the row, side by side, filling each empty space with a new plant, pressing the earth into place, adjusting stems, clearing debris from the edges of the replanted beds. Neither of us spoke, because the work itself was the conversation. Two people choosing to build something in a place where something had been destroyed. And that choice said everything that words would have taken longer to say and gotten less right. By the time the last seedling was in the ground, the terrace looked like something that could bloom again. Not yet, not tomorrow, but soon. The rows were straight, the soil was fresh and dark. The small green stems stood in the evening air reaching for a sun that had already set, but would return. It always returned. Davin brushed the earth from his hands and stood, and I stood beside him. And together we looked at what we had planted. I used to think I understood my husband completely. I used to watch him tend to flowers and cook for servants and stand politely while admirals insulted him. And I believed I had cataloged him correctly. A gentleman from a minor species, placed in my life by diplomatic arrangement, uncomplicated, warm, harmless. I was wrong, profoundly, completely wrong. But not in the way I feared when I first understood what he was. He is the most capable person I have ever met. He carries inside him something vast and precisely governed that I do not have a word for in any language I have spoken. He can read a room the way other people read text. He can assess a threat before it has finished forming. He can move through danger with a stillness that makes the danger look disorganized by comparison. And every morning, he kneels in the garden and plants flowers. Every evening, he asks what I would like for dinner. Every night, he stands on the balcony and watches the dark. And I know now that he is not searching for the star he was born under. He is standing guard. He is watching the dark for the things that might come out of it, so that the people he chose can sleep without knowing what keeps them safe. That is not harmlessness. That is something I did not have a word for until he showed me what it looked like. Strength so settled in itself that it does not need to be demonstrated. Capability so fully owned that it does not need to be performed. A person who knows exactly what they are capable of and makes a different choice anyway. Every single day, because they decided who they wanted to be, and they are still deciding. At the formal ceremony where the liaison position was officially recognized and recorded into the sovereignty's 9,000-year archive of diplomatic appointments, someone asked him why he had chosen Athara. Out of all the places, all the options he had reviewed, all the worlds and courts and postings that a man in his situation might have selected, why here? He looked at the question for a moment, the way he looked at things that mattered to him, with a kind of careful, unhurried attention that made the thing being looked at feel genuinely considered rather than processed. Then he said, I spent 3 years destroying things very efficiently. He paused. I wanted to learn how to build something instead, and I wanted to learn it somewhere that understood why building something was worth the time it took. He looked at me. I found both. The Velesi blossoms bloomed 6 weeks later, blue and white, exactly as they were supposed to be, covering the entire terrace in the unhurried abundance of something that had been given the right conditions and the right amount of time and had done what it was always going to do. I stood on the balcony above and watched him in the garden below, on his knees in the soil, hands in the earth, humming something I still did not recognize. Some melody from a world 17 light years away that drifted up through the warm morning air like a thread connecting two very different places. He looked up and caught me watching, smiled, the same smile. Warm open a little too many teeth by our standards. Blue or white for the council table today, I looked at the blooms below. Both colors in the morning light, both exactly right. Both, I said. He nodded, with the gravity of someone receiving information that genuinely mattered to him, and went back to his work. And I turned away from the balcony and went to face whatever came next, the way I always had. Except now there was someone tending to something growing below, and the sound of humming in the morning air, and the knowledge that when the evening came and the stars appeared and the dark needed watching, someone was already there. Someone who had chosen to be here and chose it again every single day.